Behemoth, the demon king of gluttony that even hell fears. Have you ever wondered what it would take to make the devil himself feel inadequate? What kind of creature could be so grotesquely powerful, so impossibly massive, that even the legions of hell would step back in awe and terror? Tonight, we're diving into the twisted legend of Behemoth, a demon so ancient and so monstrous that his very existence challenges everything you thought you knew about evil. This isn't just another demon story. This is about a force of nature wrapped in scales and fury, a being that represents humanity's darkest appetite taken to its most horrifying extreme. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why some medieval scholars believe that looking upon Behemoth's true form would cause instant madness. But here's the thing that'll keep you up tonight. According to some texts, Behemoth isn't locked away in some forgotten corner of hell. He's waiting, watching, and when the end times arrive, his hunger will finally be satisfied. So buckle up, because we're about to explore one of the most terrifying entities ever conceived by human imagination. Let me take you back to a time when the world was young, when the boundaries between the divine and the demonic were still being drawn in blood and fire. Picture this: the moment of creation itself, when God's voice thundered across the void and light exploded into existence. As the waters separated from the land, as the first stars ignited in the heavens, something else was being born. Not in the celestial realm, not in the peaceful gardens that would become paradise, but in the deepest, most primal corners of creation. Two beasts emerged from the cosmic chaos, creatures so powerful that they could never be allowed to meet, so dangerous that God himself had to separate them for the safety of all existence. The first was Leviathan, the serpent of the sea, a monster that could coil around the entire world and swallow ships whole. But today, we're not talking about Leviathan. We're talking about his counterpart, his equal in power and terror. We're talking about Behemoth, the beast of the land, the demon king who would come to embody the sin of gluttony itself. And trust me when I say, the rabbit hole we're about to go down is darker and stranger than you can possibly imagine. The name Behemoth appears first in the book of Job, one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew Bible. But here's where it gets interesting. The word behemoth is actually the plural form of the Hebrew word behemoth, which simply means beast or animal. So why use the plural? Some scholars believe it's an intensive plural, meaning the beast of beasts, the ultimate animal, the creature that embodies all bestial nature in one terrifying package. It's like calling something the King of Kings or the Holy of Holies. Behemoth isn't just a beast. He is beast itself, the pure, undiluted essence of animal power and hunger. In Job chapter 40, God himself describes Behemoth in terms that have puzzled theologians for thousands of years. Listen to this description, and I want you to really picture it in your mind. God says, "Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. What strength he has in his loins, what power in the muscles of his belly. His tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are close-knit. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like rods of iron. He ranks first among the works of God." Now, on the surface, this might sound like God is just describing a really big hippo or maybe an elephant. And for a long time, that's exactly what many biblical scholars believed. But here's where the story takes a sinister turn. As Judaism evolved and came into contact with other cultures, as the concept of demons and fallen angels developed during the Babylonian exile, Behemoth transformed. He went from being simply a big animal to being something far more terrifying, a demon prince, a fallen angel, a representation of sin itself made flesh. By the time we get to the medieval period, Behemoth has become fully demonized. He appears in the demonology texts as one of the great princes of hell, specifically as the demon who oversees the sin of gluttony. And this isn't just about eating too much at Thanksgiving dinner. We're talking about an insatiable hunger that can never be satisfied, a void that consumes everything it touches, an appetite that would devour the entire world if given the chance. Let me paint you a picture of how medieval demonologists described Behemoth. Imagine a creature so large that mountains look like anthills beside it. Picture a beast with the head of an elephant, but twisted and wrong, with eyes that glow like furnaces and tusks that drip with a black, oily substance that corrodes whatever it touches. His body is that of a hippopotamus, but scaled up to impossible proportions, covered in plates of armor-like hide that no weapon can penetrate. His legs are thick as ancient oak trees, each footfall causing earthquakes that can be felt for miles. His tail, which the Bible compares to a cedar tree, is actually a massive, club-like appendage capable of leveling entire forests with a single sweep. But the most terrifying part? His stomach. Medieval texts describe Behemoth's belly as being so large, so eternally empty, that it generates its own gravitational pull. Demons and damned souls alike are said to be drawn toward him, sucked into his maw to fuel an appetite that has been growing since the dawn of time. Some accounts claim that you can hear the screaming of thousands of tortured souls emanating from within him, their cries of agony serving as his digestive symphony. The demon Behemoth represents something deeply psychological, something that resonates with the human experience in a profound and disturbing way. Gluttony isn't just about food. It's about consumption. It's about the human tendency to take more than we need, to consume resources without thought, to let our appetites control us rather than the other way around. Behemoth is the physical manifestation of that impulse taken to its ultimate extreme. He is what we become when we let our hungers define us completely. In the hierarchy of hell, as laid out by various grimoires and demonology texts from the 16th and 17th centuries, Behemoth holds a position of immense power. Some texts place him as the general of hell's armies, commanding legions of demons in the eternal war against heaven. Others describe him as the cupbearer of hell, the demon who serves at Lucifer's table during the great infernal banquets. Think about that image for a moment. The demon of gluttony serves food and drink to the devil himself. There's a twisted poetry to it, isn't there? But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Behemoth's mythology comes from Jewish apocalyptic literature, specifically from a text called the Apocalypse of Baruch. According to this ancient text, Behemoth and Leviathan were separated at creation for a very specific reason. God knew that if these two primordial beasts ever met, if they ever fought or mated, the resulting catastrophe would destroy all of creation. So Behemoth was confined to a desert called Duodain, a place of absolute desolation, while Leviathan was bound to the depths of the ocean. They exist on opposite sides of the world, forever separated, forever yearning for confrontation. But here's where the prophecy gets really interesting, and I want you to pay close attention to this because it connects to beliefs that persist even today. According to Jewish eschatology, the end times mythology of Judaism, when the Messiah finally arrives and the world is renewed, Behemoth and Leviathan will be released from their prisons. They will meet in epic combat, a battle so fierce that it will shake the very foundations of reality. And when they finally kill each other, their flesh will be served as a feast for the righteous, a great banquet to celebrate the end of the old world and the beginning of the new. Think about the symbolism there. The demons of consumption are being consumed. The beasts that represent humanity's basest hungers are being transformed into nourishment for the faithful. It's a powerful metaphor for the transformation and redemption that comes with the end of days. But it also raises a disturbing question. What if they don't kill each other? What if one survives? What would a world look like with either Behemoth or Leviathan as its apex predator? As Christianity spread and absorbed elements of Jewish demonology, Behemoth's legend evolved even further. In Christian tradition, he became firmly associated with the 7 deadly sins, specifically serving as either the representation of gluttony itself or as the demon tempter who leads humans into gluttonous behavior. Medieval morality plays often featured Behemoth as a character, usually depicted as an enormous, grotesque figure who tempted the virtuous protagonist with food, wealth, and material excess. But the Christian interpretation added something new to the mythology, something that makes Behemoth even more terrifying. In Christian demonology, Behemoth isn't just about physical hunger. He represents spiritual emptiness, the void that forms in the human soul when we try to fill it with material things rather than divine grace. He's the demon who whispers that one more purchase will make you happy, that one more meal will satisfy you, that one more indulgence will finally be enough. And of course, it never is. That's his power. He feeds on the cycle of desire and disappointment, growing stronger with each unfulfilled craving. One of the most detailed medieval accounts of Behemoth comes from the work of Peter Binsfeld, a German bishop who lived in the late 15th century. Binsfeld created a classification of demons that matched each of the 7 deadly sins with a specific demon prince. In his system, Behemoth was unquestionably the demon of gluttony. But Binsfeld's description goes beyond simple association. He writes about Behemoth as a corrupter, a demon who doesn't just tempt people to overeat, but who fundamentally alters their relationship with physical reality. According to Binsfeld, those who fall under Behemoth's influence begin to see the entire world as something to be consumed. Food becomes the only source of comfort. Material possessions become the only measure of worth. Every experience is evaluated solely on how it can be acquired, possessed, and used up. It's a philosophy of pure consumption with no thought for sustainability, for others, or for the future. Sound familiar? Look around at modern consumer culture, at the way we're encouraged to constantly buy, upgrade, consume, and discard, and you'll see Behemoth's influence alive and well in the 21st century. Now, let's talk about something that most people don't know about Behemoth, something that connects him to other mythologies in fascinating and disturbing ways. The description of Behemoth in Job, particularly the emphasis on his strength, his bones like tubes of bronze, his muscles of iron, bears striking similarities to descriptions of primordial chaos monsters in other ancient Near Eastern cultures. In Mesopotamian mythology, there was Tiamat, the dragon of chaos, who had to be slain for the world to be created. In the Canaanite myth, there was Yam, the god of the sea and chaos. In Egyptian mythology, there was Apep, the serpent of chaos, who threatened to swallow the sun. What all these myths share is the idea of a primordial beast that represents the chaotic, untamed forces of nature that existed before creation, forces that must be defeated or contained for ordered civilization to exist. Behemoth fits perfectly into this pattern. He's the chaos that existed before God imposed order on creation, and he's still out there, still waiting, still hungry. Some scholars have suggested that the biblical authors were deliberately drawing on these older mythologies, incorporating and transforming them to fit within a monotheistic framework. But here's the unsettling part. If Behemoth is based on older chaos monsters, monsters that were believed to be real forces in the universe, does that mean the ancient authors believed Behemoth was literally real? And if they did, should we? The Islamic tradition also has its own version of Behemoth, though the details differ in interesting ways. In Islamic cosmology, there's a creature called Behemoth, a vast fish or whale that supports the entire world. According to this tradition, Behemoth swims in an endless sea, carrying on its back a giant bull or ox called Qiyada, which in turn carries a ruby mountain, on top of which stands an angel who holds the earth on its shoulders. It's like a cosmic stacking toy, each layer supporting the next. Now, the connection between the biblical Behemoth and the Islamic Behemoth is disputed by scholars. The names are clearly related, but the creatures themselves are quite different. However, both represent the same basic concept: an unimaginably powerful creature that exists at the foundation of reality itself, so strong that it literally holds the world together. The difference is that in the Islamic version, Behemoth is a neutral cosmic force, while in the Judeo-Christian tradition, Behemoth is inherently dangerous, a creature of chaos that must be contained. This raises an interesting theological question that medieval scholars spent countless hours debating. If Behemoth was created by God, as the Book of Job explicitly states, then how can he be evil? How can a creature fashioned by divine hands become a demon? The answer, according to most theologians, lies in the concept of fallen nature. Just as Lucifer was created as the most beautiful angel and fell through pride, just as humanity was created good and fell through disobedience, Behemoth represents the corruption of creation itself. He was made as the mightiest of beasts, the apex of animal creation, but something went wrong. His strength became violence. His appetite became greed. His power became tyranny. He is, in essence, the beast that chose to become a monster. Let me share with you some of the actual rituals and beliefs surrounding Behemoth from medieval grimoires and magical texts, because this is where the legend gets really wild. In texts like the Lesser Key of Solomon and the grimoire of Pope Honorius, demons are not just described, but are given specific conjuration methods, seals, and purposes. Most demons in these books have a particular function. Some grant knowledge, others provide wealth, still others offer power over enemies or skill in arts and sciences. But Behemoth? Behemoth is almost never conjured intentionally by magicians. You know why? Because he can't be controlled. According to these texts, Behemoth is one of the few demons so powerful and so dangerous that even attempting to summon him is considered suicidal. The grimoires warn that calling upon Behemoth will result in immediate and catastrophic consequences. He doesn't grant wishes or answer questions. He simply consumes. The texts describe magicians who attempted to conjure Behemoth and were found days later, their ritual chambers empty except for gnawed bones and the lingering smell of sulfur and rotting meat. There is, however, one interesting exception. Some texts suggest that in cases of extreme famine or starvation, a desperate magician might attempt to invoke Behemoth's name not to summon him, but to petition him for abundance. The logic being that the demon of gluttony must have access to endless supplies of food and sustenance. But even these rituals came with terrifying warnings. The food provided by Behemoth would sustain the body but corrupt the soul. Those who ate from his table would find themselves never satisfied again, always hungry, always craving more, slowly transforming into something less than human, something more like Behemoth himself. One particularly chilling account from a 17th century grimoire describes a village in Bavaria that, facing a terrible winter famine, collectively decided to perform a ritual to Behemoth, begging him for food. According to the account, the next morning, the village square was filled with meat, bread, and other provisions, more than enough to feed the entire population through the winter. The villagers rejoiced and feasted. But as the weeks passed, something horrible began to happen. The villagers couldn't stop eating. They consumed their mysterious bounty with increasing desperation, but no amount of food satisfied them. They began to change physically, their bodies swelling grotesquely, their features becoming more beast-like. By spring, when travelers finally reached the village, they found it abandoned, the buildings destroyed from the inside, and strange, enormous tracks leading away into the forest as if the entire population had transformed into beasts and wandered off. Whether this story is true or simply a medieval cautionary tale, we'll never know, but it perfectly captures the terror associated with Behemoth's influence. Now, I want to shift gears and talk about what Behemoth represents in a more psychological and philosophical sense, because I think this is where the legend becomes truly relevant to modern life. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, would probably have identified Behemoth as a shadow archetype, a representation of the repressed aspects of human nature that we don't want to acknowledge. Specifically, Behemoth embodies our animal nature, our physical needs and desires that civilization teaches us to suppress and control. Think about it. We live in a world that constantly tells us to control our appetites. Don't eat too much. Don't be too greedy. Don't indulge your physical desires. Share resources. Think of others. Delay gratification. These are all important values for a functioning society, but they require us to constantly fight against our basic biological programming. Every animal, including humans, is programmed to eat when food is available because our evolutionary history was defined by scarcity. We're programmed to desire more than we need because having excess meant survival. Behemoth is what happens when we completely give in to that programming. He's the nightmare version of unchecked appetite. And here's what's really unsettling. In our modern world of abundance, at least in developed nations, we're all becoming a little more like Behemoth every day. We have access to more food, more entertainment, more consumer goods than any generation in human history, and yet we're more dissatisfied than ever. We consume and consume and consume, and the hunger never goes away. We've created a culture that worships Behemoth without even realizing it. The environmental implications of this are staggering. Our collective human appetite for resources, for energy, for land, for goods, is literally consuming the planet. We're behaving exactly like Behemoth, eating everything in sight without thought for tomorrow, driven by an insatiable hunger that can never be filled. When medieval priests warned about the sin of gluttony, they weren't just worried about people getting fat. They were worried about this exact scenario, a world consumed by consumption itself. Let's talk about some of the artistic representations of Behemoth throughout history, because the way artists have visualized this demon tells us a lot about how the concept evolved over time. In medieval illuminated manuscripts, Behemoth is usually depicted as an enormous elephant or hippo, often with exaggerated features like impossibly large tusks or a gaping maw filled with human figures. These illustrations were meant to be educational, helping illiterate churchgoers understand biblical stories and moral lessons. But as we move into the Renaissance and later periods, artistic representations of Behemoth become more abstract and more terrifying. Hieronymus Bosch, the Dutch painter famous for his nightmarish visions of hell, included what many scholars believe to be a representation of Behemoth in his triptych, The Garden of Earthly Delights. In the Hell panel, there's a creature that appears to be consuming human souls, with a grotesque, bloated body and an expression of mindless hunger. It's not labeled as Behemoth, but the symbolism is clear. William Blake, the English poet and artist, created his own interpretation of Behemoth as part of his illustrations for the Book of Job. Blake's Behemoth is simultaneously majestic and terrifying, a creature of such immense power that it seems to exist in a different dimension than the human figures in the scene. Blake understood something profound about Behemoth. He's not just a monster to be feared, but a force of nature to be respected, an elemental power that exists beyond human moral categories of good and evil. In modern popular culture, Behemoth appears in various forms, though often divorced from his theological origins. In role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, Behemoth is usually portrayed as a massive beast or demon lord. In the Final Fantasy video game series, Behemoth is a recurring powerful enemy, depicted as an enormous purple monster with horns and devastating attacks. In the Hellboy comic series and movies, there's an apocalyptic beast called Behemoth that factors into the end times mythology. Each of these interpretations takes something from the original legend while adding new elements, showing how myths evolve and adapt to new cultural contexts. But here's something really interesting that most people don't know. The word behemoth has entered the English language as a common noun, meaning any extremely large or powerful entity. We talk about corporate behemoths, political behemoths, and social media behemoths. We use the word without thinking about its origins, but every time we do, we're invoking that ancient concept of a force so large and powerful that it operates by its own rules, consuming everything in its path. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Facebook are frequently described as behemoths. And is that really such a bad comparison? Don't they operate with an insatiable appetite for data, for market share, for growth, consuming smaller competitors and expanding into every possible sector? The metaphor is more apt than we usually realize. Now, let's dive into one of the most controversial aspects of Behemoth's mythology, his relationship with Leviathan. I mentioned earlier that according to Jewish apocalyptic literature, these two creatures will battle at the end of days. But some mystical traditions suggest something even more disturbing. In certain strands of Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition, Behemoth and Leviathan are described as masculine and feminine aspects of the same primordial chaos. They're not just enemies or counterparts. They're cosmic opposites that together represent the totality of unchained natural power. According to this interpretation, Behemoth represents the earth principle, the land, the fixed and solid, the masculine force of structure and form. Leviathan represents the water principle, the sea, the fluid and changing, the feminine force of dissolution and flow. The reason they must be kept apart isn't just because they destroy each other in combat, but because if they ever united, if they ever joined together, they would give birth to something even more terrifying than themselves. Absolute chaos, the complete undoing of creation. This interpretation has led to some wild speculation over the centuries. Some medieval commentators suggested that Behemoth and Leviathan were actually the same creature, able to transform between land and sea forms, representing the demon's ability to adapt and survive in any environment. Others proposed that every natural disaster, every earthquake and tsunami, was the result of these two creatures struggling against their bonds, trying to reach each other across the world. There's even a tradition that suggests the legendary sea monster known as the Kraken is actually one of Leviathan's offspring, and that deep in uncharted jungles, there roam gigantic beasts that are Behemoth's descendants. According to this mythology, the age of dinosaurs wasn't millions of years ago, but was actually the time when Behemoth's children ruled the earth, and their extinction wasn't a natural event, but a divine intervention to prevent these creatures from becoming too powerful. As wild as that sounds, remember that for centuries, people really believed this. They looked at fossilized dinosaur bones and saw evidence of Behemoth's existence. Let me share with you one of the most chilling prophecies associated with Behemoth, found in various apocalyptic texts and grimoires. According to these sources, there will come a time when humanity's collective hunger becomes so great, when our consumption becomes so overwhelming, that we will accidentally summon Behemoth without meaning to. Not through any magical ritual, not through any deliberate invocation, but simply through the sheer weight of our appetites. The prophecy suggests that when enough humans are simultaneously focused on desire, on wanting, on consuming, their combined spiritual energy creates a beacon that Behemoth cannot resist. And when he arrives, the texts say, he won't come with fire and brimstone. He won't announce himself with trumpets and apocalyptic signs. Instead, he'll simply start eating. He'll consume everything: crops, livestock, buildings, people, entire cities. And the truly terrifying part? The prophecy claims that we won't even recognize it's happening at first. We'll rationalize it. We'll blame it on climate change, on natural disasters, on economic factors. We'll come up with scientific explanations for why resources are disappearing, why populations are declining, why entire regions are becoming uninhabitable. But all the while, Behemoth will be feeding, growing stronger, consuming the world bite by bite until there's nothing left but his eternal, gnawing hunger. Is this prophecy literal? Probably not. But as a metaphor for the way unchecked consumption is destroying our planet, for the way our collective human appetite is literally eating the Earth's resources faster than they can be replenished, it's almost too accurate. Maybe Behemoth has already arrived. Maybe we're living through his feast right now, too blind to see it because we're part of the consumption ourselves. Let's talk about exorcism and protection against Behemoth, because unlike most demons in Christian and Jewish tradition, there aren't many recorded attempts to cast out Behemoth's influence. The reason is simple: he's considered too powerful for normal exorcism rituals. Most demons can be banished by invoking the names of God, by using holy water, by reciting specific prayers or psalms. But Behemoth is different. He was created by God. His name appears in Scripture. He's woven into the fabric of creation itself. How do you exorcise something that has divine origin? The few texts that do discuss protection against Behemoth suggest that the only defense is internal discipline and spiritual fortitude. It's not about external rituals, but about internal transformation. You protect yourself from Behemoth not by keeping him out, but by giving him nothing to feed on. Fasting, moderation, gratitude, contentment. These are the weapons against the demon of gluttony. If you can train yourself to be satisfied with enough, if you can look at abundance without feeling the need to possess it, if you can resist the cultural programming that says more is always better, then Behemoth has no power over you. Medieval monks understood this deeply. Monastic life, with its emphasis on simple meals, shared resources, and rejection of material wealth, was designed specifically to combat the influence of demons like Behemoth. The monastic vow of poverty wasn't about suffering for suffering's sake. It was about freedom from the endless cycle of want and consumption that Behemoth represents. By choosing to live with less, monks believed they were choosing to live beyond the demon's reach. But here's where it gets really interesting from a modern psychological perspective. Recent research in consumer psychology and happiness studies has consistently shown that beyond a certain threshold of material comfort, additional wealth and possessions don't increase happiness. In fact, they often decrease it. The constant acquisition of new things creates a hedonic treadmill where we need more and more stimulation to feel the same level of satisfaction. Sound familiar? That's Behemoth's influence in purely secular terms. The ancient monks figured out what modern science is only now confirming. The appetite for more is a trap that can never be satisfied, and the only way to win is not to play. There's a fascinating historical connection between Behemoth and the medieval concept of aesthesia, which was considered the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins before being replaced by sloth in later interpretations. Aesthesia is difficult to translate, but it roughly means a spiritual emptiness or apathy, a feeling that nothing matters, that nothing can satisfy. It's the state of being so consumed by consuming that you lose the ability to find meaning or joy in anything. Medieval theologians believe that aesthesia was often the final stage of demonic possession by Behemoth. First came the obsessive hunger, then the relentless consumption, and finally the hollow realization that none of it meant anything, that the hunger could never be filled, that you'd been tricked into devouring your own soul. This progression is eerily similar to modern descriptions of addiction and depression, isn't it? The cycle of craving, indulgence, temporary satisfaction, and then deeper emptiness. Whether you're talking about food addiction, shopping addiction, substance abuse, or even social media addiction, the pattern is the same. And at the heart of it all is Behemoth, the demon who represents the insatiable appetite that can never be filled, no matter how much you feed it. Now, let's explore some of the lesser-known stories and legends about Behemoth from various cultural traditions, because this is where the mythology gets really rich and strange. In Ethiopian Christian tradition, there's a story about a saint named Tekel Haymanot who encountered Behemoth during a vision quest in the desert. According to the legend, the saint had been fasting for days when Behemoth appeared to him, not as a threatening presence, but as a teacher. The demon showed Tekel Haymanot visions of the future, of humanity's endless consumption, of cities that stretched to the horizon, filled with people who had everything but were satisfied with nothing. But then Behemoth showed him something else, a vision of transformed humanity, people who had learned to live in balance, who had conquered their appetites without suppressing their joy, who consumed only what they needed and found abundance in simplicity. And according to the legend, Behemoth wept. The demon who can never be satisfied shed tears because he saw what he could never have, contentment. The story ends with Tekel Haymanot asking Behemoth if redemption is possible even for demons, and Behemoth answering, "Ask me again at the end of days." It's a beautiful and haunting story, one that suggests even the demons of our worst impulses might long for transformation, might dream of being something other than what they are. Whether this legend has any basis in ancient texts or was created by later storytellers, it adds a layer of tragedy to Behemoth's character. He's not just a monster. He's a prisoner of his own nature, forever hungry, forever empty, forever seeking something he can never find. In Jewish folklore from Eastern Europe, there are stories about people who claim to have seen Behemoth's footprints. These weren't metaphorical or spiritual sightings, but literal physical evidence. According to these tales, there are places in the world, usually deep in forests or high in mountains, where you can find enormous crater-like depressions in the earth, areas where nothing will grow, where animals refuse to go. Local wisdom held that these were the places where Behemoth had stepped or rested during his wanderings through the primordial wilderness before God confined him. One particularly detailed account from 19th century Poland describes a forest clearing that was said to be a Behemoth footprint. The area was roughly circular, about 50 feet in diameter, and completely barren despite the lush vegetation surrounding it. Local villagers reported that the ground was always slightly warm to the touch, as if something vast and alive was sleeping far beneath the earth. They believed that Behemoth had been buried there at God's command, locked in stone and soil, and that the heat rising from the ground was his breath as he dreamed of the feast that would come at the world's end. Scientists who have studied similar geographical features usually explain them as the result of meteor impacts, volcanic activity, or unusual soil composition. But the people who live near these places often maintain their connection to the old legends. And who's to say they're wrong? Maybe every scientific explanation is just another way of describing the same fundamental truth that the ancient stories were trying to express. There are forces in the world larger and stranger than we can fully comprehend. Let me tell you about one of the most bizarre Behemoth-related phenomena in occult history, the cult of the First Hunger. This was a real, documented group that existed in France during the late 16th century. They weren't Satanists in the traditional sense. They didn't worship evil or seek to harm others. Instead, they were a philosophical movement that believed Behemoth represented the fundamental truth of existence, that all life is hunger, that all action is consumption, and that accepting this truth was the path to enlightenment. Members of the cult would engage in alternating periods of extreme fasting and extreme feasting, believing that by experiencing both ends of the spectrum, they could achieve a state of consciousness beyond normal human experience. They claimed that during their extended fasts, they could feel Behemoth's presence, could commune with the demon of hunger itself. And during their feasts, they believed they were participating in the apocalyptic banquet where Behemoth's flesh would be consumed by the righteous. The Catholic Church, unsurprisingly, declared them heretics and hunted them down. But here's the weird part. According to historical records, when church authorities raided the cult's meeting places, they found the members had simply vanished. Not fled, not gone into hiding, but literally disappeared, leaving behind only their clothes and possessions. The church declared it evidence of demonic abduction that Behemoth had claimed his followers. More rational explanations suggest the cult had a sophisticated escape network. But the mystery was never fully solved, and to this day, there are people in France who claim to be descendants of the original cult members, still practicing their strange rituals of hunger and feast in secret. As we approach the end of our journey through Behemoth's dark legend, I want to address the question that's probably been forming in your mind. Is any of this real? Is Behemoth an actual demonic entity? Or is he simply a metaphor, a story ancient people told to explain forces they didn't understand? Here's my honest answer. It doesn't matter. Whether Behemoth exists as a literal demon prince in some spiritual realm, or whether he's purely a human creation, a personification of our worst impulses, the effect is the same. The hunger is real. The consumption is real. The emptiness that comes from trying to fill an infinite void with finite things is real. Call it Behemoth, call it human nature, call it the dark side of capitalism or evolutionary biology or sin. The name changes nothing about the fundamental reality. We are all struggling with the same insatiable appetite that Behemoth represents. And here's the truly terrifying thought I want to leave you with. Behemoth grows stronger every time we feed him. Every impulsive purchase you don't need. Every meal you eat past satisfaction. Every resource you waste. Every time you choose more when enough would do. Those aren't just personal failings. According to the logic of the mythology, they're acts of worship. You're making offerings to the demon of gluttony, feeding him, giving him power, bringing him one step closer to breaking free from whatever mystical prison confines him. But the opposite is also true. Every time you choose contentment over craving, every time you share instead of hoard, every time you say, "I have enough," you're fighting back. You're weakening his grip on the world. You're proving that humans can be more than just appetites, that we can rise above our base programming and choose a different path. The medieval monks had it right. The battle against Behemoth isn't fought with swords or spells or prayers, though those might help. It's fought in the small, daily choices we make about how we live, what we consume, and what we truly value. And it's a battle we can't afford to lose because the stakes couldn't be higher. If the legends are true, if Behemoth is indeed waiting for the end of days to have his final feast, then maybe, just maybe, the end of days comes when we finally feed him enough. Maybe the apocalypse isn't a divine plan or a cosmic accident. Maybe it's the inevitable result of unleashing Behemoth's hunger on a finite world. So what can you do with this knowledge? How do you fight a demon that's been growing in power since the dawn of creation, whose influence is woven into the very fabric of modern society? Start small. Start personal. Examine your own appetites. Where are you feeding Behemoth in your life? Where are you letting consumption replace contentment? Where are you trying to fill a spiritual void with material things? This isn't about becoming an ascetic or rejecting all pleasure. It's about being conscious, being intentional, being aware of the difference between need and want, between satisfaction and excess. It's about recognizing when enough is enough and having the strength to stop there. It's about breaking the cycle of endless consumption that Behemoth represents and finding meaning in something beyond appetite. The story of Behemoth is ultimately a warning, passed down through thousands of years of human history. It's our ancestors trying to tell us something vital: beware of your hunger. Not because hunger is evil, but because, unchecked, it will consume you. It will consume everything. The beast is real, whether he exists in hell or in the human heart, and he is always, always hungry. So the next time you feel that familiar pull, that voice telling you that you need more, that what you have isn't enough, that satisfaction is just one more purchase, one more meal, one more indulgence away, remember Behemoth. Remember that this hunger has a name, has a history, has a mythology spanning millennia. Remember that countless generations have fought this same fight, and that some of them won. You can win too. You can look at the beast of endless consumption and say, "Not today, not me. I choose contentment." And maybe, if enough of us make that choice, if enough of us stop feeding the demon, he'll finally starve. Maybe that's the real meaning of the prophecy about Behemoth being served as a feast at the end of days. Maybe it's not about eating his flesh, but about finally conquering our appetite for more, transforming the demon of gluttony into something that nourishes rather than devours. That's the secret the ancient texts were trying to tell us all along. The apocalyptic battle between Behemoth and Leviathan, the feast of their flesh, the renewal of the world, it's not a future event waiting to happen. It's a choice available to us right now, in this moment. We can continue feeding our demons until they consume us, or we can face them, name them, and transform them into something better. The legend of Behemoth isn't just ancient history or quaint mythology. It's a living story playing out right now in our world, in our cultures, in our hearts. And unlike the people who first told this story thousands of years ago, we have the benefit of seeing where unchecked consumption leads. We're watching it happen in real time. Resources depleting, ecosystems collapsing, climate changing, and yet the appetite for more only grows stronger. Behemoth is winning, but the story isn't over yet. The ending hasn't been written, and maybe, just maybe, we can still choose a different conclusion than the one the prophecies predict. Not through divine intervention or apocalyptic battle, but through the simple, radical act of saying, "I have enough," and meaning it. If this video has opened your eyes to the dark legend of Behemoth and the uncomfortable truths it reveals about human nature and modern society, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I dive deep into myths, legends, and occult history, revealing the hidden wisdom and warnings our ancestors tried to pass down to us. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. We're all in this fight against our own demons together, and I want to hear from you in the comments. Where do you see Behemoth's influence in the modern world? What appetites do you struggle with? How do you practice contentment in a culture of endless consumption? Let's start a conversation, because maybe that's the first step in breaking the demon's power, acknowledging it, naming it, and talking about it openly. Thank you for joining me on this dark journey into one of history's most terrifying and relevant myths. Remember, Behemoth is always hungry, but you don't have to feed him. Choose wisely, choose consciously, and maybe, just maybe, choose enough. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and stay aware of the demons, both ancient and modern, that shape our world. This is your host, signing off. Don't let Behemoth win.